Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. In this episode, we'll talk about the state of the presidential race after the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. We'll analyze the first couple of days of the Republican National Convention, and we'll release our new poll in Michigan's 7th district. And we'll do it all from lovely Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Buckle up. I'm Jacob Rubashkin, the deputy editor of Inside Elections, the go-to place for nonpartisan political analysis for more than 40 years.
And I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections, and we are coming to you from
Milwaukee, which is in Wisconsin's 4th congressional district, represented, of course, by Democratic Congresswoman Gwen Moore.
And we're here because we're here for the Republican National Convention. This is our lovely Airbnb about 2 miles from the perimeter. For those of you maybe on TV, you've seen there's extensive security. That is the understatement. There are more levels of law enforcement here, but so we're outside the perimeter a little bit, but we get to do this in person. We're in the same room. So
this is actually the first time I've ever seen Nathan in person. So it's a real exciting event for me as well.
This might be the last time, but that's all right. It's been a good run. But here we go. No, it's fun. And this is, I'm trying to think if this is my 4th set of conventions. So I'm the old one, but I'm excited because Jacob gets to experience this all for the first time. And we will be in Chicago at the Democratic Convention in August. So.
Yeah, just a couple of weeks from today. But before we talk about small things like conventions, assassination attempts, and exclusive polling from Inside Elections, what else has been going on in the political world?
Yeah, well, New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez was found guilty on all 16 counts of corruption charges in federal court. The senator had said he would run as an independent if he was acquitted of the conviction, but the conviction likely foreclosed on that path. He will face calls to resign. I believe his New Jersey colleague, Senator Cory Booker, is a part of that. He may even be expelled. Democratic Governor Phil Murphy will get to appoint a replacement senator to fill out the remainder of the term. And that appointment might be complicated, right, by the front runner in the race?
Yeah, so Congressman Andy Kim is the front runner in the Democratic primary. Well, he won the Democratic primary. He is the front runner in the general election. He is a sitting member of Congress. So if Murphy were to appoint him, he would have to give up his seat in the House. The Democrats don't have a majority, but they have enough members that they can cause all sorts of trouble for Republicans. It would actually help out Republicans to lose a Democratic member to the Senate. So we'll see what Governor Murphy does, and we'll see what Andy Kim wants to do for the next couple of months, which side of Capitol Hill he wants to walk to in the morning. But I think increasingly unlikely that Senator Menendez finishes out his term.
Yeah. I don't think this ended quite the way he wanted or expected. But also there's more New Jersey news.
So in other New Jersey news, there was a special election for the Donald Payne seat in the 10th district. New York City Councilwoman, New York City Council President LaMonica McIver won the Democratic primary pretty handily for this special election to replace Don Payne, who died several weeks ago. She will be a shoo-in for the very strange September 18th special election, which is very strange because it is a Wednesday. We don't see these very often, but that's when the governor scheduled the race. And she's also almost certainly going to be the party's general election nominee. She'll get chosen by a group of party leaders for that job because the primary has already taken place and Payne won it posthumously. But McIver, more importantly, will be the 38th of our likely new members of Congress. So she'll get there a little bit earlier than most of those other members, but for now, she's the next person on their way to Capitol Hill.
And the likely new members of Congress list is something we've been putting in the newsletter for subscribers, members that win primaries that are in solid or likely takeover districts. So these are, or states if they're senators, places where the primary is basically the most important race, because the general election, it's either very Republican or very Democratic, very Democratic district. The last thing, it's important in our world for House. It seems a little less important compared to some of the big events that have been going on that we'll talk about. But in Minnesota's 2nd district, grassroots favorite Taylor Rahm dropped his bid for the Republican nomination, clearing the way for leadership favorite Joe Tayrab to win the primary and take on DFL Congresswoman Angie Craig. This district has trended leftward, and Craig will be tough to beat, but this was a good sign for Republicans. And actually, this is a case where Trump helped the cause. Sometimes, anyway, the candidate who dropped out of the race, I believe, is joining the campaign or joining the Trump effort, and that cleared this race up. It helps Republicans focus on defeating Craig. This is in the Twin Cities suburban area.
Yeah, this was a latest example in a long series of pretty good primary news for House Republican leadership. They have successfully navigated a lot of their more tricky contests and ultimately landed on their preferred candidates, as opposed to some of the more grassroots candidates who come in with a little bit of political baggage. So we saw this take place in Colorado, where House leadership got their preferred candidates. Now we're seeing it a little bit in Minnesota. We saw it in Ohio. With such an evenly divided House battlefield, of course, Republicans need as many lucky breaks as they can to hold on to their majority. And so far, unlike in previous years, they've gotten more of the candidates that they desired into the general election.
And this is a good example of a district or a race where if things really if the bottom drops out for Democrats kind of across the board, that they need to have quality candidates in place to take advantage of the opportunity to defeat incumbents who have been tough to beat in the past, but maybe the environment could help them defeat someone like Congresswoman Craig, who's proven her ability in the past, but this could be a really tough cycle for down-ballot Democrats.
And as I think you've reminded me before and other people have said, the true measure of a wave is when bad candidates win. So one thing that we should open our minds to is in the potential for a big year for either party, the candidate quality at a certain point stops being determinative. And that's how you end up with members like we won't name, like TJ Cox, who
from California,
who win and then get subsequently indicted on all sorts of federal charges. So at the moment, this district doesn't look super competitive, but always worth keeping an eye on a district that until recently was one of the premier swing seats in the country.
Yeah. Well, we've got some big topics to talk about.
All right.
So let's move on.
So we'll start with the biggest news of the last couple of days. Saturday afternoon, evening, Pennsylvania, Trump rally. The former president came within millimeters of losing his life in an assassination attempt that did claim the lives of at least one person at a Trump rally, a retired fire chief who was sitting behind Trump or near Trump, injured several other people. The former president suffering a wound on his ear. A really kind of terrifying and tragic and deeply unsettling development in this presidential election that we had thought had seen kind of as much trouble as we were going to see, but just added a completely new dimension to the race that everyone has been tracking for the last couple of years. And a real frightening moment, I think, for all of us, for all of our politics. I think that the question that's on everyone's minds now is, what does it mean moving forward?
Right.
And not just for the increased security perimeter and posture at the conventions, but how does this affect the presidential race, if at all? What can we expect moving forward as a country and as the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign continue to process what we saw happen on live TV on Saturday.
I think this is one of those historic moments that I'll certainly never forget where I was. And I think my whole family won't forget, because we were driving from Indiana back to Washington, D.C. And we were actually at that time pretty close to driving through the Pittsburgh area across the turnpike. And then I'm driving, my daughter's in the back seat, and she's like, "Dad, someone just tried to kill Trump." I'm like, "What?" It's just not something you expect to hear from your teenager in the back seat. And so then I'm having my daughter and my wife try to read news stories, and then we turned on the radio, and first we were listening to Fox News, the coverage, just sort of surreal, and just a terrible that someone would go to those lengths, whatever was the motivation that we're in this position. Now that we have a little bit of distance, I think we can talk politically about what it means. And I try to remind myself that this presidential race has been very stable. Not a lot has changed, because you have two very defined individuals in Trump and President Biden. And even though this was a historic event by any measure, it doesn't mean it was a game-changing event politically. And we have to wait. We're still, a few days out. We're recording on Wednesday morning. We're still just a few days from that event. I think we still have to let the dust settle and see how do real people react to it. We know here at the convention that it has been a rallying point, that I think Republicans were going to be excited anyway, but having that literal outside threat at the person that they want to be president again has brought I think a higher level of energy and enthusiasm on the Republican side. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be different turnout, which is something that impacts it. Or we don't know, do more people rally to, or more independent voters or undecided voters, are they now more likely to vote for Trump because of what happened to him? I'm a little bit skeptical, but yeah, I don't know. And I guess the other thing is it has changed the conversation, right? Remember what we were talking about before this? We're talking about the debate. We're talking about President Biden's age and ability to both be a candidate and serve in office. And that debate, or that conversation, has not gone away, but it has changed. Now we're talking about assassination, convention, J.D. Vance, things that we'll talk about later.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think that the easy answer is, this will change everything, but that's not always the actual answer. I think that 2020 is an instructive example of this phenomenon as well. That also ultimately, I think, was a pretty stable race. And despite the world-changing events, the cataclysmic events that we saw take place there, the contours of that race didn't change much after the Biden emerged from that Democratic primary. I just think that we're pretty polarized as a country, and these two candidates are so well-defined, so well-known, that the potential for a real shift is pretty slim. I mean, we saw this with the debate. The debate was one of, I would argue, probably the defining moment in this campaign so far, and it shifted the national environment 2 points, 3 points, something pretty marginal when you think about how polls used to move, right? If you go back to the 90s, to the 80s, you would have these wild swings. Of course, we had less polling, so maybe it was all just noise. But, Bush would be up one day, and then Dukakis would be up the next day, and you would have a lot more variability that we just don't see anymore. Even the most major of events is unlikely, I would say, to totally upset the apple cart here. We may eat our words when Democrats swap out Biden for a different nominee, and it changes the whole picture.
We might do it before we even get this on air. But anyway,
yeah, no, I agree. I think that the long-term political impacts of the assassination attempt are very difficult to divine at this early juncture, and especially given that the convention is ongoing, and we know that historically there is evidence that candidates get a little bit of a convention bump. Right. And so disentangling any sort of bump that Trump got after surviving the assassination attempt from any sort of bump he's going to get from the convention, I will leave to the more astute data gurus who have quantified the exact percentage point that you get from a convention bounce, but I think that it's going to be trickier than just saying, oh, this is going to benefit Trump or this is going to hurt Trump in the long run.
And we have to remember when we talk about the presidential race not changing a lot, that is not changing a lot from a race that is still structurally good for former President Trump. I mean, he is leading in the key swing states, enough of the key swing states in order to win. And so sort of continuing along a status quo path, I think continues to be good for President Trump rather than President Biden, who before the debate needed to change the trajectory, change the conversation. That did not happen, and that continues. And it's now there's a little bit of reluctance on the Democratic side, I think, to keep up that heat on President Biden to step aside because he is trying to be presidential. They realize that he's trying to lead the country through an incredible time where his political opponent, a former president, was almost killed, and Democrats are trying to give him the space to perform the duties of president, but there's the urgency of the nomination, the upcoming Democratic convention, and realizing that he still is probably not their strongest candidate in the general election.
Yeah. The time is running out for Democrats to solve their Biden problem. And if they can't do that, then Biden needs to solve his Biden problem. And it's just not obvious that he's in a position to do that and that his campaign has a strategy to figure out the next less than 4 months before Election Day. They've spent the last 3 weeks fighting against other Democrats. They need to find a way to, if they're going to stay in this thing, turn it around and start getting into it with Trump again. Otherwise, it's going to be a very long general election for Democrats.
And here in Milwaukee, the first 2 nights have been a couple instances where the shooting is part of already as I said, convention culture that when President Trump after he was almost killed, stood up and kind of raised his fist. That was kind of a sign to fight. And here at the convention, one of the themes of the first 2 nights, not themes, but chants that when the arena gets going is just fight, fight, fight.
I think
fight.
he said fight. On stage as he was being kind of hustled away by the Secret Service. So that definitely has become a chant. The fashion statement of the bandage on Trump's ear. He walked in. Nobody had seen him really since the shooting, and he walked into the arena with a bandage covering his ear on Monday night. And by Tuesday, we saw delegates on the floor wearing bandages on their ear as a sign of support for the former president. Maybe we'll see more of that tonight, but certainly it is on everyone's minds what happened last Saturday on the convention floor.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, I mean, the detail that is falling around J.D. Vance now, I think, not that I've been around very many VP nominees in the past, but, I think there are probably 30 people in his detail at least.
Goodness. This is going to be more information than what people need, but I'm going to go for it anyway. We were in the arena yesterday being Tuesday, and I was trying to use the restroom. And there was security. They were pushing people. This is in the outer concourse of the arena, and I had to go through security. They were trying to push people aside. I'm like, I'm just trying to. Someone important was trying to come down. They were waiting for them to come down the hallway. I just need to use the restroom. Like, can I go? And so I was able to go. Everything went fine. But then I was trying to get out, and it was just a whole thing. But the way that Senator Vance's life has changed in terms of the number of people and security around him. His life is changed. Even if they don't win, his life is at least temporarily changed for the next 4 months.
Yes, no, certainly. That's a good segue. Let's talk a little bit about what we have seen over the last couple of days at the convention. Now, for our listeners, I think it's important to note that we are recording this at 9 a.m. local time in Milwaukee on Wednesday morning. So what does that mean? It means that we've gone through the first 2 days of the convention, but we have not yet gotten to J.D. Vance's first speech as the vice presidential nominee or Trump's speech on Thursday night as he accepts the nomination. So we don't know what's going to happen then, but we have been here for the last 2.5 days taking it all in as the Republicans get together to nominate Trump for a third time.
I think a clear takeaway is that Republicans are excited. I mean, they're happy to be here. I said before, I think they would have been happy to be here. Conventions are, the most party faithful delegates from all across the country coming together. They want to have a good time. They want to support their party, support their candidate, do the official business of nominating, but they also want to dance. There's a live band on the stage. I don't know on TV because we're watching it live. I don't know on TV. There's a live band just to the right as you're looking at the stage, and people want to dance and they want to go to parties afterward. They want to go to events. I mean, it is a celebratory environment, and that what happened on Saturday just adds to that. I think unity. Unifying the party. Well, we'll see. I don't, politically, this is a 4-day commercial for the Republican Party. Democrats will have their commercial next month. So I don't know politically if it changes all that much, but it is, I think, good to be in this environment and good to be in the Democratic one later. Sometimes we get in our bubble and looking at numbers and things, but it's good to actually feel the energy and be around people that are committed to the cause right now of Trump.
Yeah, I think overwhelming confidence coming into this convention, coming out of this convention. Pretty much every Republican we talk to at this point, with the exception of one or two people that I won't name, but I'm always interested in their thoughts as well, are pretty convinced that they've got this thing in the bag, I would say. I mean, I think there is a tremendous amount of good feeling about the electoral prospects of Trump at the top of the ticket. And of course, it's a convention. It's a self-selecting audience. That was always going to be the case. But I do think that there's an even more kind of joyous atmosphere than one might have expected from a very arguably still close presidential race. And so that's been interesting to see as well.
And one of the key moments that stuck out to me was the roll call vote or the call of states. It actually, different than conventions past, Republicans did it right off the bat on Monday afternoon. And this is the call of states is when they officially nominate the president from a party perspective. It is really a business meeting for the party where they're very official Robert's Rules of Order, that they're going through. But one of the moments stuck out to me is when the Kentucky delegation, it was their time in the role, and Senator Mitch McConnell, former majority leader, came up and he was booed. Yeah. He was drowned out in what he was trying to say at the microphone, and it stuck out to me for at least a couple reasons, because when Mitch McConnell was majority leader, the Republican majority helped confirm a number of judges that have helped President Trump stay out of more legal trouble than what he is. It's also was not lost on us as people who follow races that the outside group called Senate Leadership Fund that McConnell has been spent $50 million or $40 million.
I think it was like 36.
Spent $36 million on the Ohio Senate race that helped J.D. Vance get elected, and now J.D. Vance is the vice presidential nominee. So it's just a sign. It's just yet another sign that this is Trump's party, and Trump has voiced his frustrations with McConnell and leadership. But it's just like, do people realize actually how important McConnell has been to getting the party to where they are here in Milwaukee and the different places? But I don't think they were making those distinctions. And I want to hear your thoughts of coming into this as with a fresh set of eyes. We were planning on going to the convention in 2020 together, and that everything kind of got sideways because of COVID and there weren't normal conventions. But one more McConnell moment. We were on the floor, on the House floor where the arena floor where most of the delegates are, and McConnell was trying to leave the floor. And so it was McConnell, his wife, Secretary Elaine Chao, and McConnell has a multi-member security detail. But there was an NBC reporter doing an interview on the floor in the aisle with Laura Trump, and they were blocking the way. And McConnell, his security's trying to push through, and everyone's just jam-packed together. And it was and someone was trying to get McConnell's attention and say, Andy says hi. And McConnell clearly had no interest in engaging with this individual. And Secretary Chao ended up, helping this guy get what he needed. But it was just one of those moments where lots of things are happening at the same time. It's one of the reasons why I enjoy being. But what has been your initial impression?
I think the most interesting moment to me was when Nikki Haley came out on stage to deliver her address last night. This is Tuesday night that we're talking about. I think that it speaks to the post-assassination attempt mood, that she was not booed off the stage, that she was actually received very well, and that people, it seemed like in the audience, really appreciated that she was here to strongly endorse Trump. And she made some, she kind of tiptoed around some of her very high-profile disagreements with the former president. She alluded to them, didn't go into detail, of course, but overwhelmingly a positive pro-Trump speech that she delivered, and really aimed at people who supported her in the primary, who might be a little bit more Trump skeptical. And there were a few scattered boos, I would say, at the beginning as she came out, but certainly overwhelmingly cheers. And that is not the attitude that Republicans had toward her 5 months ago. I mean, she was unpopular within the party. She was more popular among some Democrats than she was among Republicans. And for her to come out to that kind of reception, I think spoke to an interest that the RNC had in at least unifying their own party. I think that the notion that they're striving for unity beyond Republicans at this point, I think is a little bit specious. I think there was certainly a lot of anti-Biden, anti-Democratic messaging that's coming out of this convention. I'm not getting a national unity message necessarily, especially from, we can talk about Carrie Lake maybe in a little bit, but I do think that within the Republican Party, which has struggled in the last several cycles to coalesce around Trump, they have really finally, 8 years in, wrapped their heads around him being the guy. And that at this point, if you're not with Trump, you're not even at the RNC. You're not in the picture anymore. If you're at the RNC, you are with Trump 100%, all rowing in the same way.
Yeah. There was an interesting contrast from Monday night and Tuesday night. Tuesday night was Senate candidate night. All of the either presumptive or actual nominees for the Republican Party in the key Senate races and current senators, Senator Rick Scott and Ted Cruz, spoke on Tuesday night. And I would say the speeches they weren't all very engaging. I mean, we were on the floor in the back, right in front of the stage, and you could kind of get a sense of the room, and people were being polite, or some were paying attention, some weren't. And I would say maybe the most engaging one might have been Hung Cao of Virginia. He seemed to kind of get people going. Sam Brown of Nevada, Carrie Lake kicked it off, but some of them were, I'd say, some of them was wet blankets on a crowd that was ready to be rip roaring. But that was a contrast to Monday night when you had some elected officials who were not Senate candidates, but Congressman John James of Michigan, Congressman Wesley Hunt of Texas, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, notably all African-American men. The crowd was eating it up. I mean, they were energy, engaged, and excited. And that was a kind of a contrast to the Senate class, which doesn't have as much diversity as what, we saw those speakers on Monday night.
Yeah, I was really struck by how unenthusiastic the crowd was when it came to these Senate candidates. I think that it speaks to the degree, again, to which Trump has become the dominant force in the Republican Party. The convention is always going to be about the president primarily, but it is also an opportunity to give the most crucial Senate candidates in your party a national spotlight and direct attention on those all-important races. I don't think that people in the audience were particularly interested in what Bob Casey was up to in Pennsylvania. When Dave McCormick, the Pennsylvania Republican nominee, got up there, he made a comment about Bob Casey to crickets, and he tried to spin it. He said, you don't know who Bob Casey is because he doesn't do anything. And I just I think that it was striking that with the exception of Carrie Lake, I would argue, the audience really was not into it, and they're into Carrie Lake because she is one of Trump's biggest surrogates.
That's my family's real life story. We escaped from Vietnam just days before Saigon fell to the communists. We were given a new life in the most generous country on earth. My name's Hung Cao, and America saved my life.
The standout speech to me was Hung Cao, who, of course, is one of those candidates who is the least likely to win his race
in Virginia.
And he's running against Tim Kaine, and in Virginia, that's a tough contest. Even if Virginia is a little closer at the presidential level, Tim Kaine is very popular. He's a former governor, former mayor of Richmond, former VP nominee, has won 2 terms in pretty strong fashion in the Senate, and is polling very strongly right now. But Cao, who spoke toward the end of the lineup, I mean, he came out and he started banging on the lectern. He gave a pretty harrowing recollection of his parents' escape from Vietnam in the fall of Saigon. The story that he told, I think, was much more compelling, and he delivered it in a much more interesting way, I would argue, than a lot of the other candidates.
And he knew the audience. I think it was a good piece of speech writing. He started the speech that way, and he said, "I'm running against Hillary Clinton's running mate," right? So for people who had no idea who he was, or they're like, okay, they're like, I can get on board with this guy. Or Congressman Jim Banks of Indiana, who is going to be a senator because he won the primary. There actually wasn't really much of a primary. At the end of Jim Banks' speech, he said that he was proud that Indiana, their polls close at 6 p.m. Eastern time, and they're going to be the first state to deliver delegate or deliver electoral college votes for Donald Trump. And it's like, okay, most people are not caring about the Indiana Senate race, but he knew, like, all right, this is the audience. This is what they want to be excited about. They want to be excited about Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I don't think that any of these Senate candidates are going to see their campaigns live or die by the convention speech, right? That's not something that is going to be determinative in how they perform in the fall. But the reality is, I don't think any of those candidates, with the exception of Banks and Jim Justice, who was kind of a sideshow in his own speech to his bulldog baby dog, none of those candidates are polling ahead in their races. I mean, there were 5 or 6 top tier Senate candidates on that stage from Arizona, Montana, Ohio, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania. Did I say Wisconsin? If I didn't,
no.
I'll say it again.
It's not like we're here. It's not like we're sitting
here. And if the election were held today, I'm not sure any of those candidates would win.
They have work to do.
So they do need to kick things up another notch. But I do think it's interesting that Republicans even spotlighted them at all. I mean, I just think back to the 2020 Democratic Convention, where I believe the only screen time that Sarah Gideon got, and she was the Democratic nominee for Senate in Maine, running against Susan Collins, one of the biggest races of the cycle. She raised like $100 million. The only time she got at that convention, the only spotlight she got was in a pre-recorded video, to introduce musical guest Maggie Rogers.
There we go.
So, the Republicans at least are taking it seriously enough to give each of their top candidates a little speaking slot in the course of the night. We'll see if it helps kickstart any of their campaigns. But I would imagine this was probably Hung Cao's best fundraising hour since he started the race.
Before we move on, we had to talk about maybe the best sighting. One of the things to try to describe the convention, there are just people moving around everywhere, and you don't know who's going to be walking, if it's going to be kind of a high-profile reporter, member of the media, or a member of Congress, or a celebrity, and Republicans as kind of pseudo-celebrities. But what has been either the most random person you think you've seen or most interesting sighting walking around? I mean, last night on the floor, I saw Alexi Lawless, the former U.S. men's soccer player, and he has much shorter hair now than what he did when in his soccer playing days. But I thought that was I thought it was random. Apparently, it's not a surprise that he was here. But who sticks out to you?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I got a kick out of seeing former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. I think I ran into him 4 or 5 times. It shows you what he had going on during the convention day. I think it's been interesting to see kind of the former senators who are wandering around here, who are still kind of plugged in. I'm trying to think if there have been any real kind of star sightings. I think the Republican nomination probably punches a little bit below its weight when it comes to the A-list celebrity tier. But, fingers crossed I'll run into John Voight and I'll tell him how much National Treasure still means to me as a child and now as an adult. So hopefully I'll get that opportunity. Or Dennis Quaid, who's got a movie out, and Dennis Quaid, I believe The Parent Trap, which was one of his starring roles, another movie very integral to my
the remake of Parent Trap.
Yes,
not
the remake.
Yes. Some of us are old enough to remember the original, but you're talking about the remake.
Lohan.
Yeah, that is not the original. But yeah, it is technically Parent Trap.
Yes. Another movie that a lot of fond memories of. So
we've clearly gone off the rails. Now we're talking about Lindsay Lohan. Who knew that she was going to come up? But yeah, but let's move on.
That series, a poll that we conducted recently in Michigan's 7th congressional district. It's the first of 5 planned, and we're going to talk through the results here. But why don't you kind of kick us off with explaining why Inside Elections, this newsletter that we've got here, is getting into the polling game, and what we hope to get out of this exercise.
Apparently, we wanted to receive more criticism, and we wanted to know.
People weren't mean enough to us on Twitter.
So let's get into polling.
Exactly.
It's interesting because if you're listening to this podcast, you realize we are obsessed with House and Senate races, and there really is not a lot of public House polling. I mean, the presidential race, there's a ton of polling. The top Senate races, there's usually a lot of polling. No one cares about House races, and so it's like, okay, let's have this partnership with MPI, and let's dig into some battleground districts. And one of the things that we're going to try to do, and you'll see, Jacob, when you talk about the specific Michigan results, is not only look at some of the top House races, but also House races that exist where there are other big races going on. In Michigan, there's this Michigan 7th District is one of our 10 races rated as toss-up, but there's also a big U.S. Senate race. It's a presidential battleground, and we ask those questions, what's happening in that district, in those races as well, to not only try to get good data to make our analytical decisions, our ratings decisions, but also get context for what's going on. So to me, I'm just, in general, the more data, the better.
Yeah.
And so whether it's other people's data or now us able to commission some polls and get some good data, I'm excited. It's going to bring some people who are not going to be excited. They're going to pick apart things, but I think I'm excited. I'm excited about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you might say House races don't fall out of coconut trees. They exist in the context of all that came before them. And that's what we're trying to do here, is give ourselves a little bit more granular data than typically gets put out ever since the New York Times stopped doing their battleground House polls back in 2018, which were such a great venture. There's been a real dearth of reliable House polling. And so we are stepping into that breach and hoping to get a little bit more clarity on the most important races in the country.
Yeah, we'll run through the top lines.
Yeah, so let's get right into it. We conducted this poll in Michigan's 7th district, which is a central Michigan district based in Lansing, includes a little bit of Detroit suburbs, one of the most evenly divided districts in the country. Joe Biden won it in the presidential election in 2020 by about 0.5 percentage point. It's an open seat currently represented by Alyssa Slotkin. We went into the field from July 8th to 11th, so a little over a week ago now. We interviewed 523 likely general election voters, and here is what we found.
I should say by we didn't call 521 election votes. NPI, conducted the poll, but yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
The royal we. Yeah. So the big picture here, a good poll for Republicans.
Yeah.
Republicans have leads in pretty much every race that we tested. Let's get right into it. In the marquee House matchup between former State Senator Tom Barrett and former State Senator Curtis Hertel, Barrett the Republican, Hertel the Democrat, we've got Barrett up 48 to 41%. It's a lead of 7 points. In the presidential race, we tested a couple of different combinations. In that classic Joe Biden versus Donald Trump head-to-head, we have Trump leading 50% to 42%. We also tested a larger ballot that includes independent candidate RFK Jr., Green Party candidate Jill Stein, and independent candidate Cornel West. Mm-hmm. We found Trump with a slightly smaller lead then. He led 44% to Biden's 40%, with Kennedy taking 8% and Stein taking 1%. We also tested a matchup between Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris.
Why would we do that?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. Call the White House. And we found a similar result. Harris performs marginally better. She trails Trump by 6 points, 50 to 44%. And then we tested two different Senate matchups with two different Republican nominees. So in the Senate race, Alyssa Slotkin, who is the Democratic incumbent in this House district, is the likely Democratic nominee. When we polled her against former Congressman Mike Rogers, who spoke last night at the RNC, she trailed in this district by 1 point, 48 to 47%. But when we tested her against the other major candidate in that race, a businessman and financial guy named Sandy Pensler, she actually led 49 to 43%. So Slotkin clearly performing the best of any Democrat in this district. But overall, for a seat that was very evenly divided in 2020, swung Democratic in 2022, these are worrying numbers for Democrats heading into the fall general election.
Worrying numbers, and also in line with a lot of other numbers that we've seen in battleground states or districts where Biden is underperforming where he was in 2020. And so that is a common theme. We're also seeing Democrats overperform Biden. You might hear that term a lot, both from us and from others. That means that Democrats doing better than Biden, that they're getting a higher percentage of the higher vote share than what Biden is. That's happening in this poll, and we're seeing that across the country. And the question continues to be in Michigan 7, if Biden ends up losing Michigan's 7th district by 8 points, that's going to be hard for Curtis Hertel, the Democratic candidate in this case, hard to overperform enough to win. And that's that is one of the unanswered questions. We're supposed to know all the answers because we have a podcast called Inside Elections. But one of the unanswered questions about these elections is, how much can Democrats overperform Biden if he continues to struggle at the top of the ticket?
And this district has some peculiarities to it because it is an open seat. It's been interesting to me to see Democrats, incumbent Democrats in the House and the Senate, overperform the president in polling. Pretty much everywhere you look, incumbent Democrats, frontline members in the House and the center of the majority in the Senate are doing significantly better than Biden is. This is, of course, an open seat. Hertel is not an incumbent, and I think that's probably part of why we're seeing him run pretty much in line with President Biden. He's not well known. Barrett is better known than he is. Barrett was also the nominee in 2022.
Yep.
And it's a little trickier, I think, to try and defend an open seat than if Slotkin were running again instead of running for Senate. I think she would probably be in a slightly stronger position. So certainly worrying for Democrats. And one of the reasons that we picked this district, I think, is because it really is a bellwether for the state.
Yeah.
If you go back and look at how the state voted as a whole and how the district voted in the statewide races, it is really remarkable. Pretty consistently from 2018 onwards, This district votes within about a point or a point and a half of the overall statewide margin. So in 2022, Governor Gretchen Whitmer won the district by 10 points, similar margins statewide. In 2020, Senator Gary Peters won the district by half a point. He was winning his Senate reelection by just 1 point against John James. Biden, of course, won the district by 1 point. In 2020, he won Michigan by about 2 or 3 points. So the fact that Democrats are trailing in these races in Michigan 7th doesn't just mean that they're struggling in this one House district, but it also indicates that they've got a problem in Michigan because this has shown itself to be such a bellwether area over the last few election cycles.
And stay tuned for a future poll and a future podcast. We'll have either Mike Noble or David Byler from Noble Predictive, the polling firm that we're partnering with. We'll have them on as a guest and maybe walk through the next poll. But for more information about this poll, you can read Jacob's story at InsideElections.com. You can download an executive summary of the poll and a 45-page PDF. You can go crazy and look at all types of crosstabs on it and see what you think.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting time. And if you've got suggestions about which congressional district we should poll next, let us know. Send us an email, write to us on Twitter, drop a comment in the YouTube version of this podcast. But we're open to suggestions. If there's a district that you're interested in that you think is getting underreported, one of the great things about having this series of polls is that we don't have to wait on the New York Times or local media outlets or campaigns to decide where they want to spend their money and which districts they want to check in on. We can make those decisions.
There we go.
And I think that's pretty cool. It's a powerful position that we find ourselves in. So definitely let us know if there are places that you guys want to see polled.
Reach out to me on MySpace.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's keep going.
And finally, our last segment, look what I found. It is the moment in the show where we talk about something new or exciting that we've stumbled across. It doesn't have to be political. It can be music, food, movies. You never really know what you're going to get in this special convention edition of the podcast. Nathan, what did you find this week?
I found that I like Milwaukee. I admit, I don't think I'd been to Wisconsin before. I checked a number off the list at my old age, but I like it. I feel like people have been friendly. I could do with maybe it being about 10 degrees to 12 degrees cooler, but overall, I'm impressed. I feel like getting around, getting down, even though security is crazy, even though logistics can be crazy because of the security, it's been pretty easy to get down and move around where we need to go. But I don't know. Just people have been, maybe it's that Midwest nice thing. People have been so welcoming, helping either with directions or freebies or whatnot. I'm in on Milwaukee, so.
Yeah, I will continue in that vein. I found Spotted Cow, which is I didn't find it. It's existed before I came on the scene.
Congratulations.
I've discovered it. Must credit. No, it's a beer that you can only get in Wisconsin. I've never been to Wisconsin before, so this was my first time having it. It's pretty good. I'm glad I got a glass a couple nights ago, and I think it's pretty funny. Someone was telling me that there was a bar in Minnesota that recently got in trouble because they were furtively going across the border into Wisconsin, buying up a bunch of Spotted Cow, and then coming back and selling it in Minnesota.
Ooh, scandal.
And that is. This is a brand that prides itself on only being available in Wisconsin. And so for them to do that was a real breach of trust in the land of the Spotted Cow. So I'm glad I got to try that little Wisconsin tradition and looking forward to exploring the city a bit more.
Yeah, well, and hopefully things continue to go well over the next couple of days, and we can get out and get back, and then we get to do it all. We'll get to compare how Chicago is in their hosting duties in August with the Democrats.
Yeah, that is all the time we have. We looked at the potential fallout from the attempted Trump assassination, the latest from the Republican National Convention here in Milwaukee. and we ran through the details for our brand new poll in Michigan's 7th Congressional District. Thank you for joining us. At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to the bi-weekly newsletter. Side note, subscribers will get an early and exclusive look at all the polling we're doing this election cycle. We've got individual subscriptions and group packages tailored to association and corporate PACs. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and rate us on your favorite platform. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to our channel there, leave a comment. What district do you want to see polled next? But please do engage with it. If you don't like today's episode, please email Lindsay Lohan. We also want to thank our producers, Alan Tazinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and associate producer, Conrad Filosa. Please come back and join us next time.